Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Planning Commission for November 15th to order. Could I have a roll call of the members, please?
Alan Bucknam,
Present.
Emery Dorsey, Daniel Larson,
Present.
Janet Leo, here. Scott Ohm,
Here.
Richard Peterson, here. Amanda Weaver, here. Vivian Voss.
Present.
Thank you. Could you all join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Could I have a motion put forward to approve the order of the agenda for tonight?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the order of the agenda.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All right, let's vote.
Motion passed 8-0.
Thank you. Next up is the approval of the minutes for October 18th.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the minutes of October 18, 2018.
Second.
All right. Any discussion on minutes? Okay, I'll call for a vote, please.
Motion passed 8-0.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the public forum. This is the time for any person to speak on any subject not appearing on the agenda. If you're here to appear on an agenda subject, you'll have an opportunity. Meredith, is there anybody signed up for the public forum tonight? Okay, great. All right. We'll conclude the public forum and begin the public hearing. We have two cases up tonight. First case, number WZ-18-15. This is an application filed by Creekside Homes for approval of a zone change from agricultural 1 to planned residential development with an outline development plan. The property is located at 4440 Tabor Street. Can we get the staff report, please?
Good evening. For the record, Meredith Recker at Wheat Ridge Community Development. And joining me at the staff table this evening are Lauren Mikulak, our planning manager, and Jordan Jeffries, one of our development review engineers from Public Works, who's also been involved with the case. So this is case number WZ-18-15, which is a request for approval of a zone change from agricultural 1 to planned residential development with an outline development plan at 4440 Tabor. Again, the existing zoning on the property is A1 and it is currently vacant. I'd like to enter into the record the case file and packet materials, the zoning ordinance, comprehensive plan, and the contents of this digital presentation. All notification and posting requirements have been met, therefore the Commission does have jurisdiction to hear this case. So I'm just going to do a little bit of zoning 101 before we get into the presentation. In the city of Wheat Ridge, rezoning to a planned development is a two-step process. The first step is the outline development plan, which changes the zoning, establishes density and allowed uses and development standards for the property, sort of the concept for what could happen on a piece of property. The second step in the process is the specific development plan, which focuses on the specific details of the developments, such as the specific architecture, the drainage, lot layouts, and specific building locations, orientation, architecture, and so on. And the SDP has to be found in compliance with the ODP in order to be approved. The applicant this evening is asking for a two-step process, which means they are breaking apart the two steps and just asking for the outline development plan review this evening. Assuming that is approved by City Council or recommended for approval by Planning Commission and approved by City Council, they would then proceed to the specific development plan. The purpose for the proposal is to prepare the site for development into a 26-unit townhome community. So let's just take a look at the property. It is outlined in red on the image. Tabor Street runs along the western property line. We've got 46th Avenue to the north and 44th Avenue to the south outside of the picture. Let's see, the property is just over 2 acres in size. It is L-shaped and is currently vacant. It is zoned A1, and it is surrounded by a variety of land uses in zoning. To the north, east, and south, we've got various types of residential development, duplex, some fourplexes, some single-family. To the east, also have residential in duplexes, fourplexes, and so on. To the south, we've got some multifamily development that faces directly onto 44th Avenue, which would be down here. Tabor Street is somewhat of a dividing line. All of the properties on the western side of Tabor Street are zoned commercial, including one that was just rezoned. I think it was approved by City Council right at the first of the year, and it is a mixed-use neighborhood zoning. So kind of a hodgepodge of zonings and land uses in the area. This is a copy of the zoning map. Each of the colors represent the different zonings surrounding the property. Again, the property is outlined in red with Tabor Street along the western perimeter, 46th Avenue to the north, 44th Avenue just off the screen right down here in this location. And again, the zoning pattern's going to follow the land use, and the different colors do represent those different types of land uses. To the south, we've got R3 zoning developed into high-density residential. There's a house located right here, kind of in the crook of the property, zoned R1, that's a single-family residence, and then a smattering of duplexes to the north with some different zonings, and also to the east. And again, looking on the the west side of Tabor, we've got the Heine's Market at this location with commercial zoning. This is that property that just rezoned earlier this year, and then some more office warehouse types of units to the north, which are zoned planned commercial development. Tabor Street is designated as a collector street and is one of the primary north-south streets in the western part of Wheat Ridge. It does connect 44th Ave, or actually south of 44th Avenue up to West 52nd Avenue to the northern limit of the city line. And it connects both the I-70 frontage road and the Wheat Ridge commuter rail line. Tabor has experienced increased volumes over the years. I think because of some of the development that we've had that have become or will become a regional draw. Traffic counts in 2007 indicated a volume of about 2,800 cars per day. In 2016, we show that being about double. Just to give you a little bit more context of the area, again, here's the property, this is Tabor Street, you can see 44th. The truck stop is over to the west. These were the relocated on and off ramps for the freeway, which were rebuilt, I want to say, about 8 years ago with I-70 up here, and the lakes and so on proceeding up Tabor Street to the commuter rail station. So a few slides of the area. This slide was taken standing on the west side of Tabor Street looking north. The property in question is on the right side of the image. Again, looking east from Tabor Street, you can see some of the adjacent development. These particular units are the two duplexes that face onto 46th Avenue. These are the duplexes and fourplexes to the east. If you look really carefully, there's a guy walking his dog right here, which I thought was kind of funny, and they didn't seem to mind having their picture taken. This fence is actually the fence that surrounds that existing single-family residence directly to, I guess, located again in that crook of the property. This is looking south on Tabor Street, and again, this is that low-density residential project. Where I'm standing right now is sort of in the northern portion of Heine's parking lot, which is on the west side. And again, looking towards the east, towards sort of the tree line of the adjacent development. So included in your packet was a 2-page outline development plan. And again, the ODP is the zoning document for the property that establishes the allowed uses and development standards. It also contains a sketch plan, which includes the conceptual layout. This first sheet we're looking at is the first sheet of the development plan, and it contains certifications, legal descriptions, signature blocks. It also contains a character of the development statement, and then goes on to discuss allowed uses. So again, the primary use on the property will be single-family attached dwellings, which is another fancy word for townhomes. Accessory uses would be allowed, such as home occupations and the keeping of household pets, and that's consistent throughout all of our residential zone districts. Some of the limitations that we write into plan developments, especially when we've got common parking areas and that kind of thing, is a limitation on any sort of RV and boat storage, and there's also a limitation that no accessory structures would be allowed in the development. As far as density goes, they are proposing 26 units on a 2.07 acre parcel. That calculates out to 12.5 units per acre, which is considered to be in the medium density range in the city, and is similar to our R3 zoning. The maximum density at this location in a PRD could go up to 21 units per acre, which would be 43 units. However, they are asking for the mid-range zoning, which would serve as a density buffer between 44th Avenue and the developments, which are lower density to the north. This is the sketch plan of the property. North is to the top, and Tabor Street is over here on the western side. Again, 46th Avenue would be up here somewhere, with 44th down off the screen. The property is L-shaped, with the larger portion on the north and the smaller portion on the south. And they are proposing the 26 townhomes with the 16 units up on the northern piece, 18 units on the north and 8 on the south. The access into the property is from Tabor Street through a private drive, which sort of bifurcates those two pieces of the property, the larger north piece and the southern smaller pieces. There are alleys that then access the rear of the units and the 2-car garages that are being provided with each of the townhouse units. All of the units will face either Tabor Street, the internal roadway, or facing out to the open space, or some of the interior open space. We are showing a potential vehicular connection over here at the southeast corner of the property. The adjacent property is zoned R3 and is actually on the market for sale at this time. Let's see, the ODP does require that every townhouse have a garage that accommodates 2 cars. There's also overflow parking on the south side of this primary drive that comes in from Tabor. I believe there's 7 spaces that are striped along this area. And we also have some additional parking down here adjacent to this Track C, which is an open space feature on the property. With an ODP, the applicants are required to give preliminary drainage information that indicates a conceptual design for the property based on what is being proposed in the ODP. We would not get a full drainage report and design until the SDP or the plat applications come in. The existing topography on the site generally slopes from the west to the east, and much of the runoff from the site infiltrates in low spots along the eastern boundary of the site, so over in this location. Let's see, we also have a drainage feature in this location that will be used as an infiltration pond. And I would note that Jordan would be delighted to answer questions about that preliminary drainage review that the city has done. Let's see. This is just a little chart I put together that shows the existing A1 zoning and the proposed planned residential zoning. Just goes briefly through the uses that are allowed, and you can compare the two. We've got uses, architecture, building height, building orientation, and so on. Again, as is typical with any attached townhome project, that the front, side, and rear setbacks apply to the entire building, not the individual units. Typically, they have a common wall that is shared, and then we just look at the setbacks for the setbacks on the entire building. And the proposed setbacks are generally in line with our R3 standards. They are proposing a 15-foot setback from the front, which is consistent with some of the other neo-traditional townhome designs that we see. The multifamily perimeter setbacks for a building of this height are 20 feet on the sides and rear, and this application does meet that and is consistent with that. They are allowed, one of the design features, and I'll show that in a second, are open patios that encroach into the front yard, and they are allowed to encroach a total of 10 feet for that patio design feature. The maximum height they're proposing is 30 feet, which is less than the current A1 zoning allows. 35 is what is allowed in not only the A1 zoning, but also all of our residential zone districts, so it is less than that. And the aggregate open space minimum for the development will be 30% coverage, and that will be comprised primarily of public open space areas, and then also some small amounts of landscaping for the individual units. I would like to point out that there is what we call a paseo, which is an open space feature that runs sort of through the center of it, which will have walking path on it with landscaping, and the units on each side of that will face into that area. Again, there was another large open space tract down here at the southeast corner, which might be appropriate for something like community gardens. Included in your packet was one of the exhibits that was provided to us when we pre-apped with the applicant, which does feature one of the design features of the property, which are the roll-up kind of garage doors that we're seeing in contemporary residential construction now, with an open space patio that extends into that front setback. So, as the commission is aware, we have certain criteria that we look at when we do an evaluation of a zone change request. And the majority of those criteria are listed on the screen. I would like to address a couple of those that I think are probably most pertinent. Staff has concluded that the property is currently underutilized and has been the subject of code enforcement action in the past. The zone change to PRD is expected to add value and have a positive aesthetic impact on the neighborhood. It will also serve as a land use transition from 44th Avenue on the south, which is developed into high-density residential, to the lower density development adjacent to 46th Avenue. With regard to traffic, based on trip generation information, our Public Works Department has concluded that the street network in the area can handle the increased traffic that will be as a consequence of this development. We also think that there has been a change in the character of the area over the years. The western portion of Wheat Ridge is experiencing change with the development of the Clear Creek Crossing development, on the western side of I-70, formerly the Cabela's site. There's also the commuter rail station to the north, which we hope will be opening soon, which also we believe will kind of change the qualities and the characters of that area up north. Tabor Street is one of the only two primary connections between these areas, and does provide that connection from south of 44th up north to 52nd Avenue. Tabor is considered a collector and does have a mix of land uses abutting it. South of I-70, Tabor is generally residential on the east side and commercial on the west side. And moving north from 44th, where we've got the high-density residential development, I think was built probably in the 60s at about 22 units per acre, which will, this property will be adjacent to that at about 12 units per acre, so more of a mid-density. And then moving further north, adjacent to both the north and south side of 46th Avenue, we've got low-density residential. And we believe that this mid-density project will serve as a logical transition between those different land uses. The comprehensive plan is the other piece that in my opinion, is significant when we do a zone change evaluation. This is an image taken from the structure plan from the comp plan. You can see that I've got the site pointed out here. The row of pink dots right here represents 44th Avenue, which is considered a neighborhood commercial corridor and carries about 12,000 vehicles per day. Tabor Street is a collector street, and again, one of the only north-south streets that go from 44th Avenue north of the creek all the way up to 52nd. It's considered a collector and carries about 4,500 vehicles per day. The site itself, which is colored in yellow, is within the neighborhood classification, and in my opinion, and staff's opinion, is considered a revitalization area. The revitalization areas typically are at least a half an acre in size. They're usually bounded by a collector or an arterial, and possibly might have code enforcement issues. I know this property itself has been subject to code enforcement action, and we are concluding that what's being proposed is in conformance with the Envision Wheat Ridge Plan. Goals that would be met additionally would be, it would provide new housing options, it would result in development of an underutilized property, it would eliminate a zoning code issue, and could serve as a catalyst for other improvements to the area. As far as process goes, there was a neighborhood meeting which was held on May 30th. There were 4 neighbors in attendance with a variety of issues discussed, primarily traffic, drainage always seems to be an issue at neighborhood meetings that's discussed, as well as the land uses in the area. There were 2 comment letters submitted as a result of the neighborhood meeting. Those were included in your packet. We went out on our standard 15-day referral on this application. We did not receive any concerns from any of the agencies. Of course, the applicant will be responsible for upgrades at the developer's expense. Should this zone change go through and they proceed further in the process, we would have separate referrals for those additional applications. Planning Commission this evening is making a recommendation to City Council, who is the final authority for the zone change request, and at this point we have them scheduled for a January 14th City Council public hearing. So, staff concludes that the proposed zone change promotes the health, safety, and general welfare of the community and provides a land use transition for 44th Avenue to the low-density neighborhoods to the north. Staff further concludes the proposal is consistent with the goals and objectives of the comp plan by providing a variety of housing types and investment in an underutilized parcel. We also conclude that all requirements for an ODP have been met and that the evaluation criteria supports approval of the request, and ultimately, we are giving a recommendation of approval. So that concludes the staff comments, and we'd be happy to answer questions at this point.
Thank you for that report. Yes, let's have the commissioners ask away. Let's start over on my left. Commissioner Peterson, do you have any questions for staff? Commissioner Ohm?
I have a couple questions. One is just on the agency referral, it says that the property can be served from an 8-inch line. And then the applicant says that the water main is a 6-inch. Which one's correct? Is it 8-inch or 6-inch?
I'd have to go, my recollection is it's an 8-inch line, but I'd have to go into my files and check.
Okay. And then I want to spend some time on, it's the sketch plan. So the first question is, what is the city's standard parallel parking stall length?
Usually, it's about 20 feet.
Okay. And that's what it is. I've seen 22, I just didn't know what the standard was. And then where those parallel parking stalls are, they're literally just striping. If there's a car parked in that far, I guess, eastern parallel parking space, and someone was to drive up, I don't see any reason why they would not consider that to be, I don't know, 3-4 additional parallel parking spaces.
And we talked to Lawrence giggling because we talked about that. We had suggested that they stripe some additional stalls, especially if I lived here and I was in a hurry and I wanted to dash in the front of the house. I'd
Right.
want to park here. And so we didn't make that a condition, but
Okay.
obviously it would be available to those.
Something else to consider, just from
Sure.
just as a small design comment, is that perhaps there might be some, because there's a mail kiosk that gets a lot of traffic, and perhaps there could be more of a designated kind of little area for that, and then push the
Good
other
idea.
parallel parking spaces further to the east.
Okay.
That those are like dedicated parking, and then the other one is more of a you're just getting the mail kind of a deal.
Yep.
And then on the far east, the east side, where it says private alley C, it says potential future connection to adjacent neighborhood subdivision.
Right here.
Yeah, right there.
Yes.
So the first question is that subdivision okay with it? Is that something that they're requesting, that they want to have it connected?
This was something that staff
Okay.
requested.
So is there a street there? I couldn't tell from the detail.
No, there's not.
There's no street on the east of that.
I don't know how large that parcel is, but it's definitely underutilized. It's zoned R3.
Is it
It's
vacant?
currently for sale.
Is it vacant or?
There's a house on it and a
Okay.
couple outbuildings, but there's quite a bit of open space on it. I don't know exactly the size, but I'm
Okay.
sure somebody in the audience could answer that.
Okay. And then, so from the private primary drive A,
Okay?
I know that I often hear from staff and maybe that in Public Works that there's a dimension of 75 horizontal feet, usually between intersections, that the city does not like offset intersections. And this appears to be definitely less than 75 feet.
Between these two?
The primary drive A?
Yes.
Yes, and then the potential future connection.
Well, typically, our offsets are applicable towards public streets. That's
Right.
where we really become concerned, where they don't meet up, and then you have conflicting turning movements. So less of a concern if this would happen to develop concurrently. It would not be, at this point, we don't think it'd be a public street, more of a, again, a private drive.
Okay.
So,
And then it talks about, since it talks about that connection, I would assume that there should be like a sidewalk connection there, right? Instead of having people just walk in the road?
that would be a very good point.
Okay.
Maybe just a couple comments if I could add to the connection. So just a quick reminder, these are all good observations and a lot of things that will probably roll into the specific development plan. So what we've tried to show here, because the purpose is to show building footprints generally and circulation networks, we wanted to make sure we were capturing the opportunity for that connection, not necessarily requiring it. As you all have seen on other properties, there's sort of missed opportunities when things develop incrementally. So when we get to the SDP and the plat is when we decide if it's getting built now or in the future and get that permission. And we've made the same sort of internal observation about wanting connectivity generally for pedestrians and for cars. But part of the reason you're not seeing a lot of that detail on here is just because of the level that this plan typically is in terms of it being the regulatory document. We don't want to be too detailed on the ODP, but really good observations that I'm sure the applicant's sort of noting for that SDP component.
No further questions. Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Dorsey, do you have questions?
I'm still confused. I mean, we're talking about this future connection situation. Is that actually going to be built into it at this particular point, or is that at a later date? I mean, if this other property develops, and will that actually be a street?
Well, we don't have
What
any
is it, just going to go into the vacant lot there? Or?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be extended unless that property develops. It's just that property is zoned R3. It's currently underutilized and on the market for sale. Should it be put under contract by someone who wants to develop it, we would certainly look at the opportunity to get a horizontal connection through the neighborhood.
Their property.
Yes.
So playing this tape forward, the next couple documents you would see are the specific development plan and the subdivision plat. And we always require subdivision improvement agreement. And in that document is where we would specify the timing and responsibility for that connection, should it make sense at some point now or in the future.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you. That's all I have.
Commissioner Larson, any questions?
Yeah, just a couple of very quick questions. You referenced previous code enforcement issues. What were they?
Primarily weeds. Pretty typical for a vacant lot to have that kind of violation.
And in the applicant's application, there's mention of a small nuisance parcel nearby?
There is, and I probably let the applicant address that.
That's fine. And then just to clarify on the ownership issue, the applicant doesn't actually own the property now?
They have it under contract. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay. Have we, do we understand if the zoning is approved at this point or after this specific development?
They're closing? Is that?
Yes,
I'd let them answer that question as well.
that's fine. Thank you.
Commissioner Voss, any questions?
Yes, a couple of questions. There was speaking of a 5-foot right-of-way that the property is giving to the city.
Yes.
Is there widening of Tabor, or is that on to the existing property that the right-of-way goes 5 feet deep?
Well, so Tabor Street is currently substandard, so at the time they would come in for plat, we would request that dedication, and then that the frontage along Tabor would be improved with new curb gutter and I believe detached walk.
But only for the size of that property and
Correct.
not...
Yes.
So Tabor's not being widened.
No, just the piece in front of the property.
And then that spoke fees in lieu of parkland, but with the 2 open spaces that they're having on here, is there a difference between what you describe as open space versus parkland that they're being charged a fee for not having?
Well, every development is required to have a certain amount of open space on it. And our standard for residential or multifamily development in this kind of context is a 30% coverage. So they have the ability to provide private amenities to the folks who live here. they could do something up here in this open space tract. This is the location of the paseo. And then this piece down here could be a private amenity. We've seen people who have done community gardens that serve only the folks in the development. The parkland fee is more of a citywide requirement to help support the Parks and Rec programs, the financing of our open space maintenance, that kind of thing. And I guess if at one point, if we had enough funds accrued, they could look at buying other parkland. So it's kind of separate, but both towards kind of the same goal. Does that make sense?
No.
Fees
No.
are only waived if there's land dedicated to the city for a city park, which is rare, if not ever, on a property of this size. So it'd be more on a property maybe 15 acres or larger, where the land could be dedicated, where the city would own it and build a park. And something this small, they'd pay the fees, and that would be independent of the open space requirement.
So parkland does not equal open space then in,
Correct. You can't double dip.
Right.
Yeah.
thank you.
Commissioner Leo, any questions?
Yes, it tags in a little bit to what we were just talking about, but, you know, I know there's open space, but my question is, it looks like you had a 2-acre area that was permeable surface, and this looks like it's reducing that a lot. Sure. Do you have a standard of how much of that has to remain permeable, or?
Well, that is part of what gets reviewed when we have a final drainage report is, you know, how much is permeable now, how much is permeable after the construction takes place, and what happens to that water that ends up running off the property. And that's part of what Public Works looks at when they do a drainage review. Now, they just gave us preliminary information, but I think it was enough for them to get a gist of, you know, what can happen on the property and where the water needs to go.
Okay, that's the only question I have.
Okay.
Commissioner Weaver? No questions, all right. I just had a general question or two. I'm kind of curious about what the general history of the zoning is for this area. You know, I know we've got some medium and higher density zoning. Obviously, in its far past, it was mostly agricultural, as most of Wheat Ridge was. That's responsible for a lot of the A1 in there. But that little R1 parcel, you know, kind of stood out when we were reviewing this. And I was just wondering if you could shed any light on sort of what the history of this zoning pattern was, to just kind of provide a little context into
You know,
why it is the way it
I
is.
am not sure about that. In my youth, I participated in some of the other zone changes in the area. I worked specifically on this property, which was rezoned probably in the early 90s. And I've worked on several, actually most, of the zone changes that occurred along the western side of Tabor. As you're probably aware, we didn't incorporate until 1969, and we did inherit. We always blame Jefferson County for our crazy zoning patterns, but my recollection is, as far as I've been here, this has been R1, this has been R3.
Okay, so it might be reasonable to assume that at some point, property owner bought that R1 parcel. It was zoned A1, and they wanted to build a house, and
Right.
they had it rezoned at that time. Okay.
I have one more question
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
after you're done.
Oh, all right. I guess the only other question I had, just in terms of the permeability question that Commissioner Leo brought up, are there any standards in the building code on permeable concrete paving? Is there any sort of encouragement towards sort of the newer paving methods that, you know, or paving materials that allow a little more porosity?
Yes, we do allow those, particularly, you know, in different contexts. Jordan, I don't know if you could answer that. I know it's very expensive, and we have had people use it. Typically not in a residential context, but
Yeah, we're certainly open to it. We don't have any requirements. It's always an option. But what they proposed is actually pretty good. It mimics existing drainage patterns, and it seems like it would be a good solution.
Okay. So this note for the porous landscape detention pond on tract B, what typically would that look like? Is it just like a permeable, hardscape type of matrix? Are there plants there? What typically would that look like?
It's pretty much like a regular detention basin. There'll be an outlet structure. It just has on the bottom you would put some more coarse material, permeable material. So it functions as a regular detention basin. You're just able to decrease the size because you're also getting some infiltration in the bottom. So it's not a full infiltration basin. It allows for a little bit so you can reduce the size.
Okay, great. Thanks for answering that. Oh, I took care. All right. Well, all right. Do the commissioners have any further questions, Mr. Peterson? Yes.
Yeah, as I was sitting here listening, I got more confused. And the thing I'm confused about is this potential future connection to adjacent neighborhood. I'm not conversant with the street requirements in the city of Wheat Ridge, but it doesn't strike me that a 26-foot right-of-way with a rather sharp 90-degree turn at the end of it, and then a fairly narrow entrance into the potential future connection can be a real street. Can it be a real street?
That's a good question. So 26 feet wide is the minimum that we usually have between the curbs.
Right.
So it's not intended to suggest that this is sort of the final design with anything beyond the flow line, but it's just, again, indicated sort of conceptually that there could be a connection here. I think the exact dimensions would probably end up changing once we get that final design. But 26 is the minimum that the fire department requires from
Right.
flow line to flow line, so that's what we typically
So you must also have curve requirements, right?
Yes, we do, yep, and that would be reflected in more detailed design documents than what this is.
So I honestly don't see how it can fit in this space.
I think none of this is meant to be, none of the graphic is meant to be sort of the exact final design, so those types of details of curves and specific distances would be reflected on the next document that you would see, the specific development plan.
Was this the idea of the developer or of you folks?
Maybe,
It was me.
Maybe both, but staff in particular has seen projects recently where, on a property like this, you're seeing the aerial now, where you see a potential for change on an adjacent property, and particularly knowing, for example, that water lines have to be looped sometimes if they can't be connected street to street. Fire likes to see as much access as possible. We try to create as many sort of connections and connect the grid, so to speak, where we can. So it was certainly our suggestion.
perhaps it'll help if you look at the aerial photo, so that where that connection is being shown is basically right in here. This is that adjacent property that goes down to 44th. That could also entertain some development.
Yeah, I just get, I guess, concerned or curious about imposing a condition on a piece of yet to be developed property, yet to even be thought about developed property. And so I'm kind of wondering about that.
Sure. So I understand that concern, and I don't think it's intended to be a condition. So other ODPs that you'll sometimes see is really just a dotted line that indicates primary access points. So think of this again as if it makes sense in the future, we're alerting this zoning document and this property and this developer that there may be a need to connect it, and that would be specified in the subdivision improvement agreement. So they're not going from this to construction. The devil's in the details,
Right.
and there's another property and property owner to sort of make that make sense with, and it may never happen. But what we don't want to do is preclude it from happening if it makes sense.
It just looked like a devilish detail to me.
Fair enough.
I think what you're trying to avoid is signing off on an ODP where you've got, a building right there on that property line, which would forever preclude any kind of a connection. You're sort of allowing for that possibility
Right.
coming down the line.
Correct.
Okay.
The other thing that in this particular area of Wheat Ridge, we don't have a lot of east-west and north-south connection. Tabor Street's one of the only streets that goes through from north of the creek up to the city limit line. Also, let's see. Like I say, you might see a short connection, but it sure doesn't go through any further. And, for a lot of reasons, we want to see that connectivity. Although, as Lauren pointed out, it may never happen. But it's a concern staff has.
And just to be clear, that internal connection between these two subdivisions, that would be a private street, correct?
Yes.
It would not be a public,
A private drive.
private
More
drive.
functioning.
Okay. Just in case anybody was worried about the grid not being gritty enough and being more, okay. Any other questions? Yes, okay. Commissioner Voss?
So that's bringing to my question, a fire truck turnaround. That's pretty dead end. There you've got an alley in and up to the north, and then there's no other exit entrance, right? Just the one on Tabor?
Yep.
So how is the fire truck turnaround, or is there a backup only?
Some people don't think fire trucks can back up. That's a joke.
I wouldn't want to do it.
The applicant worked extensively with the fire department to make sure that they were comfortable and that they had access throughout the development. I'll let them address that
Okay.
more.
That's it.
Okay. Anything else for staff? All right. Thanks very much. If the applicant would like to come up, I think we might have some questions for them. If you could give us your name and business address for the record, and make a statement if you'd like, and then be available for questions, we'd appreciate it.
Flash drive they'd like to put in.
Great.
Good evening. My name is William S. Lyons, Jr., and I'm Lyons. I'm the owner of Creekside Communities, and I want to thank the Planning Commission for allowing us time to present our project here this evening. And virtually all the questions you've asked of Meredith, she wasn't quite sure of. I think I might be able to help you out. I think if you would be so kind as to let me go through our little presentation, maybe that presentation might be able to answer maybe, if not all, the questions.
Please do.
Okay, next slide, Stephen. So this, I'm just going to throw you a couple of pictures of the product that we're doing. We've built this product in 3 other locations, and we're looking for this site because we think this site, because the revitalization is appropriate for here. It's more of a modern, contemporary type of look. Next slide, please. And what we're bringing to market is this roll-up glass door concept where you're able to bring the outside in to the unit. And next slide. And what's really cool, this next slide will show you, it actually has a roll-down screen so that during the summer months you can enjoy the outside and have air coming in and out while still having natural light coming in. The next slide. So we were really excited about this property when we first looked at it because you have this amazing park across, which is about a quarter mile down 44th Avenue, which has the tennis courts and soccer fields and baseball fields and has a pond there. When I drove by it, I didn't see anybody fishing, but I understand you can fish there. And it has amazing trails for biking and walking. Next slide. So this is a site, and Meredith was, if you look in the lower right-hand corner, this is that little zoom-up area, that little common area. And what you'll notice, what we have there is a picnic area with a barbecue, has one of those cornhole type of amenities, and we have these raised garden areas. On the north side, we have a dog area with a little station with the little bags, some benches, and a horseshoe pit there. Next slide. So the left side shows the park cover, and the benches aren't there. This is a project we're building in Centennial, which is the same product that we're proposing here. And the picture on the right shows the raised planter areas. It's really, to be dead honest, I'm not into gardening, but you cannot believe how many people in these projects just absolutely love those. Next slide, please. Something that wasn't hit on yet, what I want to point to is in our guest parking, when we review the neighborhood jurisdictions with 6 other cities, we have the most parking of anybody as far as guest parking, because we investigated Golden, the city of Arvada, Centennial, Aurora, Denver, and Westminster, and Wheat Ridge. And we're proposing 2.5 parking spaces per unit, which gives us 13 guest parking. And you can see all those other cities there. They have maybe a quarter or 1.5. Denver has none. Golden has none. And we're proud to be able to generate additional guest parking. Next slide, please. So this is the zoning that Meredith sort of pointed out some of this, but 44th Avenue has all these various types of zoning up and down the street there. What you see in that little red box, you see ours is the A1, and we're going to have some additional exhibits here which we'll show you. So if we start up here, all 3 of these properties were originally zoned A1, and over the years were zoned to this PCD, which is Planned Commercial Development. And then this is where the mouse is here, the arrow. This is the project I believe the Planning Commission and City Council approved in April of this year. And then that MU zoning, we're going to show you in a slide in a second, but I'll go over all these other zonings here in a moment. So go to the next slide, Stephen. So in that mixed-use neighborhood, if you look on the left, use is permitted. So we can have residential, assisted living, duplexes, live-work spaces, but you can also have banks, financial institution, bars, taverns, bed and breakfast, daycare centers, eating establishments, and so on and so on. Next slide. But what was interesting, like Meredith pointed out, right across the street from us, you could be building up to 21 units to the acre. That's why we think ours is a pretty good transition at 12.5. Next slide. So that's the MUN, the one that was approved earlier this year. Below there is that commercial. Now, what I'd like to point out, by the way, the R1, we don't have a contract yet, but we're in talks with the gentleman to purchase it. He met with our broker today. We don't have any paperwork yet. We're actually going to have our engineer do a site plan on that and hopefully be able to build some additional townhouses there into the future. But you'll notice at the bottom there's 4 R3 pieces. These are apartment projects. They don't have any garages. To the right is a rental house, but it's zoned R3. These 2 properties are R3. Then there's one little segment of R2. Then above it is R3. And then the north of us is the R2 and A1, although on the A1 site there's a duplex. Next slide, please. Now, what was really interesting, when we went to the public records, it would appear there's the one owner here, and all these other ones here are rentals. Now, what we don't know, 2 gentlemen with the same last name, I understand they're brothers, built those, and I don't know if they live there themselves, but there's 16 units, and there's 2 owners, so 14 of them are rentals. And then to the north of us, there's additional 2 duplexes. And I believe one is an owner, but the other one I think is a rental. I don't know that for a fact, but from what our broker told us, that's what he indicated. Next slide, please. So this is of the public records. It shows, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but the 2 gentlemen own all 16 of these units. And what you have here at the bottom is R3, In the center is R2, and then above it is R3. And obviously here to the left, this is our site right here. And we're proposing an R3 type zoning. Next slide. So I don't know if, as part of the Planning Commission, if you ever get a chance to drive out to these projects when they come to us, but it would appear to us, at least, that this is, like Meredith, I believe, said, is a good subject site to have revitalization. And, you know, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I will tell you this, even though I'm standing here doing this for 40 years, I always get a little nervous up here. So if I start stuttering, please hold it, please understand. So what we're trying to do, what we found out is that as part of what we're doing is we're widening the street. We're actually putting a third lane in. A bike lane is going to go in. Then there's going to be a curb, then a 6-foot lawn area with trees, then a 6-foot sidewalk. And as well, the overhead power lines, I think in Meredith's pictures, we're going to have to remove the power poles and take those lines underground, which will clean that up, at least in my opinion. Next slide, please. So what I want to do, if you look up here, these are the property, I'll say numbers. So this is 1A. So this is in the upper left-hand corner. Once again, we're in the red here in the center. So what you have here is a very nice industrial building type where they work on motorhomes and boats and trailers. 1B, next one. So this is, I believe, part of it where you can see the motorhome and trailers here. And then they have, I think they have employee parking, and you can back and you can see the I-70 freeway. Next picture. This is a very nice, clean industrial building, but this is right across the street from us to, well, not the whole property, but a portion of it. And the next piece. This is that home that was recently zoned earlier this year where they can do the office buildings or dental buildings or 21 units to the acre. And then the next slide. We have 3 slides of all of this commercial that's across the street. So I think these are hot houses. You can tell by the fans. And you obviously have these pallets and parking and storage. Next slide. An additional hot house and with additional parking. But you can see these are wood pallets stacked up in the back with a truck. Next slide. And then this is that cute little store that's right here on the corner of 44th and Tabor. Next slide. So this is 5A. So you can see that that's below us. If you notice, it's all contiguous with the R3 around us. But if you look in, it's not, you know, you have these motorcycles and you have these little motorbikes that are covered up. You have this playground equipment butting up to it. Next slide. And you have, here we got a little quad with a little treadmill with a little motorcycle type scooter here. Next slide. And then you have more of the same here. So that's on all these apartments that are along 44th. Next slide. This is number 6. This is a apartment building as you go up Tabor. It's contiguous to the single family home. Next one. And then this is the single family home. I don't know if you notice you have the 2 hoods open in the cars. Behind here there's an engine pulling machine they're working on. It looks, I don't think it has, it's a dirt driveway. And this is part of what I'm talking about, revitalization of an area. Next slide. And then this is number 8 that's up here. And this is the duplex. There's single car garages and 2 units. I believe the gentleman lives in one of these, and I'm assuming he rents the other one. Next slide. So this is our product. And what I'd like to point out is that a generous amount of brick. And I don't know if you notice, there's quite a few windows. And I'm big on natural light, so I try to bring the outside in. And even where we have siding, please notice that, you know, we have a certain size siding here, and then a different size siding here. And here we have vertical elements, and this is horizontal. And we have these little metal awnings here, for, I call them jewelry. And then we have these more contemporary patios. And please take a look at the landscaping that we do. Next slide. So I'm going to go through these pretty quick. These are pictures of the inside of the unit. Next slide. Next slide. Just to give you a flavor of what we're doing. Now hold this one. So here again, I want you to notice all the natural light we allow. It really makes for, well, at least in my opinion, a very nice environment. Next slide. And this is the upstairs. Next. Next. And then here again, we have this, there's the TV, the fireplace, and just, We're building 114 of them right now, and we have about 84 of them sold. And so the product's been very well received. Next slide. And so one thing I really wanted to point out is that to the Planning Commission is that no matter what side you're on here in the front, whatever faces the street, always, at least in our opinion, has a very nice elevation with a generous amount of brick, because this faces the street on this side, and then this is another street down here. So we try to have whatever faces the street, make sure it has a nice strong element of quality. And I think, what's the next slide? I think that's the end of our presentation. So I hope I ran through it fairly quick, but I'm here to answer any questions you may have, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them.
Great, thanks for that. Yes, let's take questions from the commissioners. Let's start with Commissioner Weaver. Do you have any questions? Commissioner Leo? Commissioner Voss?
Yes, I do. So the presentation previous to showing us your product was the purpose for what?
I beg your pardon. I didn't quite hear that.
What was the purpose of the slides before your development showing us all the other properties?
Sort of show you what we're, to show a transition between the commercial, medium density, and then maybe potentially lower density. But we're surrounded on three sides by R3 or R2, most of it being R3. And we're looking to do the R3 equivalent in the design development.
And then why does that make a difference? What was your thought?
Well, I think Meredith can answer. At least my understanding for all the years I've been in this, they always like to have some kind of transition from one more commercial use to a higher residential, then lower residential. Maybe Meredith can answer that.
Correct. That's a concept that in planning you follow is a hierarchy of uses, with the most intensive then getting less and less and less down to the low density. And that's why one of the conclusions we made, this is a mid-density proposal, which will separate the high density along 44th and the lower density to the north on 46th.
So it's stuck right in the middle of all that low. Okay. Could you speak to the fire department and the turnaround?
Yes. We've been to the fire department a couple different times, and we have full approval from them. Our engineer from J3 Engineering, Donna Barentine, is here. There's software programs that they plug in the dimensions, and we took those software programs on paper and have the full support of the fire department.
So however they're going to do it, they're going to manage getting in and out.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Is there? And then could I just ask you, did you give any thought to keeping this, the land that it is, and putting a 1 or 2 higher cost or higher purchase price on a 1 or 2 and keeping more of it open space and land instead of wall-to-wall concrete and sidewalks and all?
The single family that's directly next to us isn't in the best repair. The apartments that I showed along the southern border aren't in the best repair. To build a more expensive product there would be, at least in my business, would be not very bright, to be dead honest. And what we're trying to do is bring a lower cost product to a neighborhood. Wheat Ridge is an amazing city. I've done couple different projects here in Wheat Ridge. And when you look at that particular location with the commercial and the industrial that's across the street, let's say I'm not sure what price point you're talking about, but say 700,000, doesn't want to be across the street from an industrial building, typically.
So you're saying you would build a 1 or a 2 home on that lot because of the cost of the size of that house, but yet you would build a 26 unit at a lower cost?
Yes, because it's easier to amortize the cost, because dropping those power lines, we're getting a quote of about $65,000. We're having to widen the street to build. Nobody would ever build 2 or 3 houses. I think the broker is here. He might be able to speak to that. But the property was listed for 6 months before we looked at it. And from what he could tell you, but I'll tell you what he told me. People with industrial buildings wanted to potentially buy that. Nobody for any type of residential wanted to buy it.
So why would anybody in a smaller unit housing want to be in the same area
Because the price point. These will be in the $400,000 price point. And it's, today, I'm sure you read the paper, I mean, the average mean price for a single family today is $539. And so it gives a chance for a younger group of people, to be able to live closer to their parents or their grandparents, because what we find is quite often people like to live close to their family. So after they come back from college, they like being close to their parents or grandparents.
And then, isn't there something, are you familiar with, maybe I need to ask Meredith, on permeable space? Did I not hear or read something through the city that they're doing a cost charge against less permeable space on a property as it goes into new development versus more permeable space versus something that seems to have less permeable space? Is there something that I'm remembering on that?
What that sounds like is a stormwater fee that I pay in Denver, and they assess your property based on the amount of concrete, the amount of rooftop. But at this point, do you know that whether we've...
Yeah, there's no requirement from Public Works. I mean, you could have 90% impervious surfaces. The thing that matters is whether they're capturing that additional runoff and reducing it in a detention basin to the same amount of what it was pre-developed, basically. So there's really no requirement on permeable or impermeable surfaces. I don't know if maybe you're thinking of open space, which would be a planning requirement, but yeah, from a Public Works perspective, there's no requirement.
So in speaking to Meredith's mention on the storm water fee, that would be more of the homeowner's charge as opposed to the developer's charge for the whole property then, as they get owned.
So all projects that have a detention facility are required to have an HOA for maintenance costs. So the homeowners would pay HOA fees, which would cover maintenance of a variety of things, including the stormwater facility.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Larson, do you have any questions for the applicant?
Yeah, to follow up on that question earlier, in your applicant letter, you mentioned that there's an existing seat out parcel on the southeast corner, but then there's a small nuisance type parcel. Could you help us understand what a nuisance parcel?
Let me tell you what my understanding is after meeting with various different officials at the city. Decades and decades ago, quite often people would call it was called a spite strip, where somebody would develop a subdivided piece of property, but then have a small strip of land that they would still own for the sole purpose that in the future, if somebody wanted to connect into it or put a street across it, they would have to come give them a check. Now, that's not allowed any longer, fortunately, but that was done many, many decades ago. I mean, it was a strategy, apparently, for whatever reason.
I guess, let's see. I'm going to have to go back into mine, if that's okay, Bill. This is you. There's two pieces that one could call spite strips. One is a strip of land that runs right through here, and there's another piece that's right here. One of these is owned by CDOT, this one right here. And I don't show parcel lines, so you can't, I mean, I can't get any closer than this to show you. But one is owned by CDOT that runs down to 44th, and then there's a piece that runs, I think, out to Tabor that was owned by the original subdivider when they subdivided this house off. That runs right here.
Let me speak to that.
Sure.
So early on, we were working with Dave Bozeman. We were working on drainage, And we were trying to figure out CDOT. Well, when they contacted CDOT, CDOT didn't know they even owned it. And so we were looking to buy it so we could take our stormwater out through there. But it was a crazy 3-year process, and there was no guarantee it was going to happen. So what I did is I ended up buying an easement on the property to the east, so I could run my stormwater out through there, out into 44th. The site, this strip of land that runs east and west, I think it's 15 feet, if I'm not mistaken. The taxes haven't been paid on it. You're in a cloud. It's like nobody knows what's going on. And that's why I wrote a check to buy an easement on the other side so that I could make sure I could take care of the water, because there was some water concern for the property to the northeast corner. And so the city made it very clear to us that you need to take care of this problem and make sure there is no problem. And we've done that. Now, it's not finalized, but we do have the easement, we have the engineering, and while it's not finalized, we're definitely in the process. But we won't get it approved unless engineering approves it.
Okay, that answers my question, thank you.
And just to follow up briefly before we get to more questions, those sorts of easements would show up on a SDP or subdivision, any kind of, probably on the SDP.
Right, we would probably include it as an exhibit.
All right. Okay, moving on, questions. Mr. Dorsey, any questions? Commissioner Ohm, nothing? Commissioner Peterson, any questions?
Yeah, I have one question. I'm not sure if we can ask questions about intentions, but here's my question about intentions. You said you were dealing on the R1 property just to the south. It's the corner that would complete the square.
Yes, sir.
Are you then thinking about integrating that into the same kind of townhouse?
Yeah, that would be the concept. Not as part of this application. It would have to be a separate application because of where we are.
Right, I was just wondering.
That way I would be consistent.
Yeah, so it becomes a unit.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I don't have any questions. Is any other follow-ups for the applicant? Okay, thank you very much for the presentation, for answering our questions. Now we have an opportunity to take some questions to us from the public. Let's see who's signed up. Okay, great, thank you. All right, so I think I see one member of the public signed up, and if you haven't signed up, that's fine. You can still have the opportunity to ask us questions. Is Kelly, is it Bathy? Oh, okay. Bailey, all right. If you'd like to, you can. You don't have to, but if you'd like to, you can come up and make a statement. Please address your comments and questions to the commission. If you have questions for applicant or staff, ask them to us, and we'll follow up.
My name is Kelly Bailey. I live at 4825 Wadsworth Boulevard. I worked with Scott at Wilmore Davis many moons ago with our kiddos. So I think I probably can shed the most light on many of the questions you guys asked in the original presentation, because I own said parcel that the proposed street private driveway would go to.
Could you speak a little more into the mic,
Sure.
please? Thanks.
So my husband and I own the parcel where that mysterious driveway goes to. And so after meeting with Mr. Lyons, when he first came to the neighborhood and presented this past spring, certainly wasn't on our radar because we love that little place, even though it's not necessarily, best use, blah, 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 planning terms. But we saw his product. Our kids went to school near one of his products at Quail Ridge, which is phenomenal. And we've seen the memory care facility go up near our house, which is also a product that Mr. Lyons has put together. So he's successfully worked with the city when I know that sometimes people feel like you can't work with them, but you can. And they've successfully done it many times within Wheat Ridge. We like what they've done in the past, and so we were interested in working with them in hopes, which it looks like it's a possibility, that our parcel would be joined with the one that you saw the presentation tonight. So it would be a continuous look a continuous product as opposed to, a building separating the two properties. So I am just delighted of what you've presented thus far and the opportunity for people to own and not just sign up to rent something, because most of these townhome or condo developments are for rent, and this is something someone can actually purchase. So that's really all I have to say. Hopefully it sheds some light on the mystery adjacent property that you guys were curious about. So.
Great. Thank you very much. Would anyone else, any of the members of the public, like to speak on this? Okay. With that in mind, I will close the public hearing on this case and entertain a motion. If there's any further discussion before a motion, we can do that too. Oh, yes.
I would like to make a motion, but I would also like to say something first. So are we discussing, or do you want me to move and then discuss?
Well, you can make the motion and then we can have it seconded, we can discuss it, or
Okay.
if you want to discuss something before making the motion in order to finalize what you want the motion to be, that's fine too.
I'll make the motion. I move to recommend approval of case number WZ-18-15, a request of approval of a zone change from agricultural 1 to plan residential development with an outline development plan for the property located at 4440 Tabor Street for the following reasons. Number 1, the proposed zone change will promote the public health, safety, or welfare of the community. Number 2, the proposed zone change will provide a land use transition from 44th Avenue to lower density neighborhoods to the north. Number 3, the proposed zone change is consistent with the goals and objectives of the city's comprehensive plan and the Wadsworth sub-area plan. Number 4, the criteria used to evaluate a zone change supports the request.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Commissioner Weaver, did you?
I just want to say, I thank you for your comments and the presentation. I think it looks like a beautiful project, and I'm really excited for it. And I think it brings some beauty to that corridor as it continues to sort of develop. And I just want to say, as a person who is in agriculture, having, I realize that there is this want for us to keep these open spaces. But if you look at the rest of the area, this project doesn't cover up any more land than some of the adjacent multifamily housing. And I think it actually does a better job of dividing up areas where water can go and having a nice circulation of open space. So I'm for it. I'm very excited about it.
Any other discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to add a few comments. One is I hope that staff works with the applicant on buffering the streets that go north-south. Going future, not for this particular case, but going forward, as we get more in detail, I just have some concerns that the private drives that go north-south, that there's going to be car lights, and that I would suggest, possibly some evergreens or something just to kind of help buffer that. I don't know if there's going to be any fences on that north side that run east-west, but that would be a good kind of a good neighbor concern. And then looking at the townhomes, I always have concerns of where do the front doors face, and in my mind I kind of went through the design and like, what could I change, what could you do differently, could you have had, there was the 2 rows of townhomes that were on the east of, there's like 3 rows of townhomes, so not the ones on Tabor, but the other 2, could you have orientated those 90 so that you would have front doors facing the street, but then you would have that 1 row on the far north side that kind of wouldn't have connectivity. And so I think I'm just kind of left, leave it as is, and that you have that common space between the farthest 2 sets of townhomes, and even though they don't face the street, that the row of townhomes facing the street on the south side of that they can kind of feel a little connected, and then you do have that community area. So that's my only comments and suggestions.
Okay. Any other discussion? I just want to echo some of what Commissioner Weaver said about how this Tabor Street corridor is shaping up in terms of the zoning and the development that's taking place on those newly zoned areas. It's nice to see a mix of both mixed-use neighborhood, the older commercial, Heine's and so forth still being down there. Both rental and owned, owner-occupied housing, I think, is essential pretty much anywhere in Wheat Ridge because it supports a wide variety of, housing affordability points. So while it's sort of viscerally maybe sad in some way to see some agricultural land go, I agree it's not necessarily the best use of the land at this point. So it will be interesting to see it develop. All right, with no other comments, I'll call for a vote. Did you have another comment? Okay.
Just one other, very quick. I would like to commend the applicants on this project. It seems like there's a lot of forethought that went into it, and you certainly seem like you have the experience to follow through and produce something that will improve the community. The concern I have is the Tabor Street itself. With the commuter station opening up on Ward Road, Tabor Street, because it's the only street that goes over I-70 that's not Ward or not Kipling, is going to get a lot more traffic. And there was a mention the traffic counts increased from 2007 to 2016, and I think they were doubled in that 10 years. It's going to double again. I mean, there's going to be so much traffic going in there. There will have to be a new traffic light put in at the intersection. And there might be consideration going forward about how Wheat Ridge approaches that development, because it's going to have to happen. So that was it. I just wanted to add that. Again, I think it's a very good project, and best of luck as you guys develop it.
And as a cyclist, it's nice to see the city planning some allowance for a future bike lane on that Tabor connection. So, all right, with nothing else, I'll call for a vote on the motion.
Motion carried 8-0.
All right. Okay, our final item in the public hearing is another case number WZ-18-21. This is an application filed by Joshua Andert for approval of a zone change from Commercial 1 to mixed-use neighborhood located at 6985 West 38th Avenue. Can I have the staff report, please?
Yeah, I was going to say it. Did you eject it already? Save to remove.
Oh, okay. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. All right. We'll reconvene at, a little more than 5. We'll reconvene at 8:30. Okay, we're starting back up with, this is case number WZ 1821, and we're going to get a report from staff.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Lauren Mikulak, the planner. I'm a planner with the City of Wheat Ridge Community Development Department, and I'll be presenting the case tonight. I would like to enter into the public record the contents of the case file, the zoning ordinance, the comprehensive plan, and this digital presentation. Thank you. Property is within the City of Wheat Ridge. All appropriate notification and posting requirements have been met, and the Planning Commission has jurisdiction to hear this case. So we'll start, as usual, with an aerial. This is a 2016 image, so just a little bit older, but the property is outlined here in red. It's located on 38th Avenue between Reed and Quay. North is to the top. I think many of you are probably familiar with this area, but just to orient you a little bit from the bird's eye view, the businesses in the area include Colorado Plus Brew Pub to the west. This is the Quality Auto, used to be B&F Tire to the east. And then across the street, this is the Dialysis Center and office, the multi-story office building, and Clancy's. The parcel is about 7,000 square feet, just under that. It's a 1/6 of an acre in size. As you can see, rectangular in shape. It does have a few parking spaces in the front and then a few more at the rear, accessed through an easement on the adjacent property. We'll look at the zoning map here for a few minutes. So as you can see, the subject property is zoned Commercial 1, that's that pink color, and it is surrounded by a sea of blue, which is designating the mixed-use neighborhood zone district. And in this particular image, the zoning is more uniform than I think we're used to seeing in many other parts of the city. And I want to give you a little bit of background to explain why that is and why the outlier of the C1 zoning on this subject property. So the city created the mixed-use zone districts in 2010, wrote them into the zoning code, and the MUN zone district was specifically written and crafted for a corridor like 38th Avenue. So it's a commercial corridor, but it tends to be more neighborhood serving, smaller in scale, smaller parcel sizes, as compared with something like a Wadsworth Boulevard. So it calls for a mix of uses, high quality design from new buildings, and again, sort of recognizes that just the scale of the built form and the businesses is a little bit smaller. So after we wrote those into the code and created the districts on paper, City Council engaged the property owners on 38th Avenue from Sheridan to Wadsworth, and ultimately there was a city-initiated zone change of the corridor in that segment, Wadsworth to Sheridan. That happened in late 2012, and with most of our city-initiated rezonings, we allow for an opt-out period. Property owner doesn't have to have a reason specifically, but they have a period of time when they can choose not to be rezoned by the city. And this property was one of 7 who opted out of 159 parcels on the corridor. So 152 were rezoned to MUN, 7 weren't. This is one of them, and that's why you see this property as C1 surrounded by the mixed-use neighborhood. A few images of the property. If you've driven by it, you've seen that there is some work going on. The applicant actually already owns the property, and they can speak a little bit to what's going on out there today. It's in a state of disrepair. You're seeing in this image also those businesses that I spoke of. So the green one to the right is the Quality Auto. The blue one to the left is that Colorado Plus. The building was constructed in 1950, and it is attached to Quality Auto, and that's not uncommon for a building of that vintage to have an attached structure but different ownerships. We have that actually sort of throughout 38th Avenue. The first floor has vacant commercial spaces, was previously used as a dental clinic, and upstairs there are 4 residential units. You can see those, the windows for those residential units from this picture also, just taken on the property. Under the current zoning, that number of residential units is considered legally non-conforming. In our commercial zone districts, we have really strict limitations on residential uses, so they have to be very clearly secondary. And under today's C1 standards, they'd only be allowed to have 1 residential unit. The mixed-use neighborhood zoning does not have that limitation because you're allowed to have all residential or all commercial or a mix of the two. So we don't put a quantitative standard on how many units can be there other than the overarching density cap. So it's not in relation to the commercial use below. The residential units, I should note, can remain because they are legally non-conforming, so they can remain under the existing zoning. It's the MUN that would sort of bring the whole property and the existing conditions into conformity with the zoning. This table compares that existing and proposed zoning. So we talked a little bit about uses, as I mentioned. C1 is mostly commercial. MUN is any residential, commercial, or a mix. Mixed-use neighborhood allows fewer and less intensive commercial uses, although in this particular case, I don't think it's a huge factor because the site is kind of self-limiting due to its smaller size. From a development standard standpoint, many of the requirements are the same. So architecture, height, build-to requirements are all very similar between the two districts. Setbacks are fairly similar. Likewise, mixed use has a little bit more flexibility for lot coverage and landscape, but there's no intention at this point to change any of the physical footprints of the buildings. I do want to talk a little bit about parking, which isn't listed on here. It's a little bit more complicated to summarize in a table, but I want to note that when, as part of creating those mixed-use zone districts in 2010, Planning Commission and Council very consciously created more flexible parking and shared parking standards as a part of the mixed use. And that's something that would be fairly helpful for a property like this that is smaller and has been fairly helpful for all of those other smaller properties on 38th Avenue where there's just not the physical space to accommodate parking necessarily on a site. You can accommodate some of it, but we have a lot of street parking. We've done a parking utilization study on 38th Avenue, so shared parking is valued and sort of written into that mixed use code in a way that it's not used in C1. From a zone change process standpoint, we did have a neighborhood meeting in October, and 4 neighbors attended that meeting, all sort of generally in support of the project and in support of the character of 38th Avenue and the direction that it's headed and would continue to head with this property owner's investments. We're not a full-service city, as you know, and for the referral for this application, there were no concerns from outside agencies. Again, there's no development proposed as a part of this zone change application. We did have a 15-day noticing period prior to tonight's meeting, and we did not receive any phone calls or letters. This image is an excerpt from the comprehensive plan, and the star denotes the location of the subject property. 38th Avenue is designated as a main street. It's the only corridor in the city with that main street designation. And we do believe that the proposed MUN zoning complies with the vision of the comprehensive plan and the 38th Avenue sub-area plan. As many of you know, sort of the existing conditions out there, 38th Avenue has a mix of uses, and the vision in those 2 documents really calls for small-scale mixed-use infill, supportive of locally owned businesses, which there are many of out there, a walkable and sort of distinct area. So MUN zoning standards, as I mentioned, were really created for a corridor like 38th, and if not for the previous property owner opting out, I think it would probably already be zoned MUN. There are zone change criteria, and that analysis is more detailed in the staff report that you received prior to this meeting. Ultimately, staff has concluded that the request meets the zone change criteria. It's supported by the adopted plans of the city, both the comprehensive plan and the sub-area plan. And this request would bring the property into conformance with the surrounding zoning, and it would bring the existing uses into conformance with the mixed-use neighborhood zoning. So we are supporting the request. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions, and we also have the applicant here tonight.
Great, thanks for the presentation. We'll take questions from the commission. Commissioner Peterson, any questions for staff? Commissioner Ohm?
Yeah, I just have one question. The Quality Auto, are they moving into that space?
I don't know if they're
Because
vacating their current space. Certainly they've expanded and they're
Okay.
occupying both right now, but
Okay.
I'm not sure what their plans are for the property that's at the corner of Pierce.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Dorsey?
I have one question.
Commissioner Larson?
You may or may not be able to answer this one. Why would the previous owner not opt out of the zone change back then?
That's a good question. Everybody that opted out had to provide that request in writing, and I'm not sure that anybody gave a written explanation for why. They weren't required to. I think our observation is that some folks
maybe misunderstood what the zoning was. Some folks didn't want to be, they had a business that maybe had a different set of standards under mixed-use neighborhood. So kind of a variety of factors in each case, but nothing documented for this property in particular.
Thank you. Commissioner Voss, questions?
I do have a couple questions. What is the height of the existing building?
That I don't know. It's 2 stories. The applicant may know, but I don't know. We don't have a lot of vertical information for property that predates the city's incorporation. We don't have building plans for this.
Go back, if you would, please, to the comparison between them. Yeah. So if you say if it does go to the MUN, that there's only 1 residential allowed in that building?
No, under today's C1 standards.
No, MUN. What would it be if it was an MUN?
There is, that same standard would not apply. So the way the code is written in our commercial only zone districts, there's a limitation of 1 residential dwelling unit per 5,000 square feet of lot area, and the square footage allotted to residential must be smaller than the square footage allotted to commercial uses. Neither of those requirements applies to a mixed-use district. So the only limitation on density in the mixed-use zoning and on this property would be the city's density cap of 21 units per acre.
And this is not an acre?
No, so we do the calculation, so it's about 1/6 of an acre, so 21 divided by 6, I can't do that math off the top of my head. If they scraped the property and redeveloped, all of those standards would apply. Anything that's existing and was previously approved to exist can remain and continue regardless of the zoning.
So if they were to scrape it and they went purely commercial, it would go to 5 feet at the max? Or 5 stories at the max?
5 stories is not typically, so in either zone district, 50 feet is the maximum building height for commercial use, and typically that results in something that's closer to like 3 or 4 stories, just because of the floor plates for a commercial building.
Okay. So right now it's 2 stories.
It's unlikely on a property this size because even though the parking requirements are flexible, I can't imagine we'd be able to park something much bigger than what the existing building is.
So because of parking, they probably couldn't go any higher?
Yep, it's a limiting factor. Okay. Yeah, we look at the gross square footage of all the floors combined, so a taller building would be harder to park.
Okay. And you said on page 12 there was a sign-up sheet. In my packet, I did not have a sign-up sheet. Did anybody else get a sign-up sheet?
No, but it probably missed the cut. It was the names of the 4 people who attended the meeting. We have that in the case file. We can provide that if needed.
I was just curious.
Yep.
Who, if they were adjacent property owners or what. So that was my curiosity on who else.
Our notice goes to anyone within 600 feet, but I don't know off the top of my head if they were immediately adjacent or not.
All right. And then on page 3, you mention a highly, let's see, page 3. A highly restricted residential use as an accessory use. Oh, let's see. Oh, that was referring to the C1, so that wouldn't come into play now.
Right.
Other than I didn't understand what a highly restricted residential uses were. And so that's my questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Leo?
No.
Questions? Commissioner Weaver? I don't have any questions either. Sounds good. Thank you very much for the presentation. If the applicant would like to come up and make a statement or presentation, that would be great. Just state your name and address, please, for the record and the folks at home.
My name is Weston Gallagher. I live at 3465 Newland Street in Wheat Ridge. I don't have a presentation.
Okay.
But I'm excited to be here.
All right. Great. Let's see. Commissioner Weaver, do you have any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Leo?
I just have one question. Is there any idea of, if you're going to rehab the commercials, the first floor, is there any idea of what's going to go in there? Is there any projection of?
Yes, ma'am. Currently, we're in negotiations with a tenant for the entire downstairs. It's for office space. So we had a lot of different hopes and plans for it, but we came across a really great opportunity to someone who wants the entire downstairs. So it'll be essentially office space.
Office space, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Voss, any questions?
Just had one question. On the very back end of the building that's parking, is it strictly just parking? Is that all the room that's back there?
Yes, ma'am. There's an easement that goes from Eugene's. He's got all of his parking. So there's an easement there, but yeah, it's just parking in the back.
And that will stay?
Yes,
as
ma'am.
Parking, you don't have any extension planned or?
No, ma'am. And to answer your earlier question, the front is 22 feet and the back is 19 feet.
What now, I'm sorry?
22 feet high in the front.
22 feet.
19 in the back.
Thank you.
Commissioner Larson, any questions?
The rental units upstairs, I think there's 4, right? And
Yes, sir.
will that stay the same?
Yes, sir.
And are they being rented now, or are they vacant?
No one is allowed in that building now for abatement purposes, but they will be rented out come beautiful spring. So we have a lot of work to do on the interior, but.
Commissioner Dorsey, questions? Commissioner Ohm? Commissioner Peterson, do you have any questions?
No ice cream shop?
Did someone tell you? We were trying. We were going to call it Sweet Ridge Ice Cream. We were close until someone wanted the entire spot, and then you got to.
Well, so
But you know what? I'll find you an ice cream shop shortly. Hopefully I'll be here again.
No,
And by the way, Sweet Ridge Ice Cream is trademarked. So
I don't have any questions.
it's on the record.
I just have a comment, and that is thank you. I have to walk by this place all the time on my way to the little bar next door. And I was always hoping somebody would do something with it. So, thanks.
We're very excited. It's going to be great. Architects here, we've been having a lot of fun over the last few months getting under contract and putting design. And the work's already going, so it's a moving train. It's going to be great come spring. So we appreciate the community support, and the city's been great, and we're really, really excited about it. So, yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I have one more question. The facade outside, is that going to be rehabbed too? I mean, are you going to do something with it?
It's going to be like neon green, and no, it's going to be, we're going to do some touch-ups, some cleanup. We don't have our rendering here, but we're not going to change too much other than just kind of cleaning up and maybe paint it a little bit. It's not nothing crazy or loud, just clean and good looking.
Actually, you could make it neon green if you wanted. It wouldn't impact our decision on the zoning change.
Only to match Tom's next door.
Just go nuts.
We will have a rooftop on there. It's one change to the facade. We got through structural plans, and it's gonna be great.
Well, I don't have any questions for you. If there's no more questions, thanks very much for coming up and for taking the time here. All right, I don't think anybody showed up to speak for the public. There are no invisible ghosts here to speak, so we'll close the public hearing. We'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move to recommend approval of case number WZ-18-21, request for approval of zone change from commercial 1 to mixed-use neighborhood for property located at 6985 West 38th Avenue for the following reasons. Number 1, the proposed zone change will promote the public health, safety, or welfare of the community and does not result in an adverse effect on the surrounding area. Number 2, utility infrastructure adequately services the property. Number 3, the proposed zone change is consistent with the goals and objectives of the city's comprehensive plan and sub-area plan and consistent with the character of the 38th Avenue. Number 4, the zone change will provide additional opportunity for reinvestment in the area. Number 5, the criteria used to evaluate a zone change supports the request. Number 6, the mixed-use zoning will bring the existing mixed-use building into compliance with the zone district in which it is located.
Second.
All right. Any discussion on the motion?
I have one comment that I would agree with my fellow commissioner. I've walked by this site many, many times, and I've just thought, man, there's like nothing there for years and years and years. So I'm very excited that there's something going to be happening. Thank you.
I just wish it was ice cream, but that's okay. I know. That's all right. Okay. If there's no other discussion, I'll call for a vote.
Did we get a second on that?
Yeah, we did.
Motion carried 8-0.
All right. Is there any old business?
I just wanted to thank all of you for coming to that joint study session to talk about the NRS. I know it wasn't quite a deep dive in discussion, but it was all helpful feedback. And to remind you all and anybody who's watching this that we will be having a public open house on Wednesday, December 12th at the Wheat Ridge Recreation Center. Please come anytime between 5:30 and 8 to provide your input. And we will continue to keep the project website updated. We're going to be putting a monthly newsletter up, so we'll have the first one up, or this month's up tomorrow or Monday. It's the city's webpage /NRS, as in Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy. So thank you all.
Great.
I had some, just one little quick tidbit of information. So at one point, a couple years ago, I delved through any information in the city council archives from 1969. It was a pretty good undertaking, and I stitched together, in case anybody's curious, a PDF of only information about 38th Avenue. One of the interesting things was that, I don't know if it was the first, but there was what is now Colorado Plus was a hotel called Jenny's, which was the precursor to it was Valente's daughter. So it was originally a hotel, and then it got turned into an Italian restaurant. And I thought that was kind of interesting that there was actually a hotel on 38th Avenue, and that the I've been waiting to tell our city attorney that the city's first attorney, his name was Mr. Fox, which I thought was, Maurice Fox, yes. One comment I did have is, I know a long time ago, after the mixed-use neighborhood rezoning went in place, that there was discussion by Meredith about permitted uses, and one of the things is if there is an auto shop that closed, there was a period of 6 months after it was no longer being used, that use went away. Is that true still?
So that provision is a non-conforming use provision that actually sort of applies across the board. It was particularly important on 38th Avenue because we had a lot of auto-oriented uses that were permitted by right, and that status changed sometimes to not permitted, sometimes to conditional use. So we highlighted that a lot when we went through this process because there were so many folks in that specific category. But for any business kind of anywhere in the city, if they wouldn't be allowed under today's standard, they close and a period of time elapses, then the same rule would apply.
So there's one auto shop east of what I know to be Quality Auto that has been an auto shop, and then it went away, and then after many months, I don't know if 6 months was it, then it became an auto shop again, then that closed. I don't know if it's still open or if it's closed, but how does the city determine, like, okay, the shop is closed, we now start the clock? How does that? So
we look at people are really good about notifying our tax licensing so that they don't get letters that say, why aren't you paying tax? So the closure date on the business license is what we base on the clock. So it may be the same property, but there was one at Harlan and 38th that we've tracked a couple of times.
That might be the one I'm talking about.
Yep. So through tax licensing.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
If anybody in the audience is interested, that would be an excellent place for an ice cream shop because it's just down the street from me. All right. Okay, any other old business? All right, any new business?
We will not be having the December 6th meeting. Is that at we're still holding the December 20th. I think Tammy called to take attendance to see if we'd have a quorum. We'll let you know pretty soon whether we'll need that meeting.
All right.
And Amanda, if you're here, you will be chair that night.
Yeah, I'm not going to be available, so you're in charge. All right. All right. All right. All right. If there's no other business, entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
I second that.
Hold on. Sorry, one more thing.
I was just hoping that we could have just a quick discussion among commissioners about the neighborhood revitalization strategy. It was a very interesting meeting. And as you mentioned, it wasn't really a deep dive. It was a presentation by the consultants, which is what they're paid to do. But there were a number of issues that were raised that just kind of went off. So some of the, I guess my question is, when will some of these issues that were raised, when would they be addressed? I guess it's a process question. What will happen next? Will there be a way to sort of formalize some of the issues that come up that this commission may have concerns about? Excuse me. And then what will the planning commission's role be in this development?
Sure, that's a good question. So I've had the same struggle. I want to know sort of how are these going to get resolved. I think the steering committee has asked the same question. Some of the members of the public have asked the same question. And the consultant has been very consistent in their response to me and to others that we're in a listening period of what are the issues and not a problem-solving period of how to address them. So I feel very confident that as we move into the second and third phases of this, beyond identifying what are the issues, that those will be addressed. I think our takeaway from the format of the joint study session is that may not have been the most productive format. So I think moving forward, we may consider doing a joint meeting, or we may consider just doing a study session with you guys as we've done in the past for code amendments. And it tends to be a little bit, so it's a smaller group, it's a different format. Council has sort of their protocols of what a study session typically is formatted like. So we'd like it to be more of a back and forth in the next time that we meet with you and the consultant. So there would be at least one, if not two more meetings just with this board.
I'm sorry, one or two more meetings of just the commission or a joint session?
To be determined, but we had some observations of, it will depend on sort of whether we want it to be a discussion or a presentation. I think if we want it to be a discussion, it will likely be a smaller group of just the planning commission.
It would be nice, I think, if we had an opportunity to kind of weigh in on sort of the process, because there are probably going to be some points where we are going to want to know a little bit more immediately about an issue that was raised, or something that, instead of having a question raised and then it just sort of fall off the table, and then when it comes time to vote on something, we really haven't had a chance to properly review it.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it didn't fall off the table. I think they're just very much in a listening mode. So it was all duly noted, just not responded to, because I think they really want to focus not on solving the issues or exploring solutions, but just understanding and hearing what are the issues and making sure that their observation on our community are consistent with your observations on your community.
Fair enough.
Thanks.
Something I'd add to Commissioner Larson's point, though, is I think it would be very beneficial to have the consultants speaking with us as a separate body, especially if they're in a listening mode.
Right.
Because while I had the opportunity to talk, some other commissioners had the opportunity to talk. Theoretically, we all had the opportunity to talk. I know, I could tell there were some time restrictions, there were some time limitations, and I got the feeling that it would have been nice to have a little more time to maybe bring up some other issues. So that would be my one recommendation.
I would agree. I don't think when we scheduled it that way, it was anticipated to have, you never know how many people might show up for citizens' right to speak, so it sort of was a little bit of a momentum killer because we thought this would be the first agenda item. That's fine. It was an important comment. But that took up, I think it ate into some of the time we'd planned for the NRS. The other thought I had, so I understand that, and maybe some of you were here for this, so there were joint meetings during the comprehensive plan update in 2008, 2009. So, and we haven't had one in the 8 years I've been here, so I think that was the let's see how this goes. And I think we all sort of had some observations and lessons learned. It's productive in some ways and not in others. So, yeah, I do think we'll probably steer towards the smaller group next time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Did you want to add anything else? All right.
Should do it.
Awesome. Sorry I didn't catch that earlier.
No, that's all right.
All right. Okay. If there's nothing else, motion to adjourn, I think, was coming on the table. Did we have one yet?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? No. All right. Let's vote. Vivian, did you vote? You need to vote. There you go.
Motion passed 8-0.
All right. Thank you. We're done for tonight. We'll see you on the 20th.